The sound of the crystal glass shattering against the marble floor was nothing compared to the vile words my fiancé just spat at my mother. 560 guests stared in silence, thinking this was the end of a lavish wedding. They had no idea it was actually the start of a war. She planned to sell my mother out during our honeymoon, but she never expected a simple farmer would make her prestigious New York family kneel and beg for mercy. My name is Robert Miller. I am 34 years old, a senior landscape architect at Vertex Horizons, and a man who has spent the better part of a decade burying his past under layers of tailored suits and polite dinner conversation. Standing there in the climate-controlled chill of the groom's waiting room at the Grand Plaza in Manhattan, I adjusted my silk tie for the 10th time. It felt less like an accessory and more like a noose. Outside those double mahogany doors, 560 people were waiting to watch me marry into the Sterling dynasty. The Grand Plaza does not just host events, it stages coronations. The ballroom smelled of thousands of white Casablanca lilies, a scent so thick it almost masked the smell of the money burning a hole in my pocket. The wedding cost $500,000, $500,000. When the bill first arrived, I had nearly choked on my morning coffee. Vanessa's father, Richard Sterling, had clapped me on the shoulder and told me that in their world, presentation was an investment, not an expense. Yet somehow the invoices always found their way to my desk. I had drained my savings and leveraged my stock options to pay for crystal stemware and imported caviar, desperate to prove that the boy from the dirt roads of the Midwest could keep up with New York real estate royalty. I walked over to the window, looking down at the chaotic grid of Manhattan traffic. I was good at my job. At Vertex Horizons, I designed rooftop gardens for billionaires who wanted to pretend they were in touch with nature without ever getting their hands dirty. I was talented at creating illusions. But today, the illusion felt fragile. Vanessa Sterling was the masterpiece I thought I had won. She was beautiful in the way a diamond is beautiful, sharp, flawless, and cold to the touch. She was the daughter of a real estate empire, a woman who had curated her life on social media, down to the pixel. Every moment with her was a photo opportunity. I loved her, or at least I loved the version of myself I saw when I was with her. She made me feel valid. She made me feel like I had finally scrubbed the soil from under my fingernails for good. But then I saw the truck. From my vantage point on the third floor, I watched a rusted, dented Ford pickup truck sputter to a halt in front of the valet stand. It was a blemish on the pristine line of black limousines and luxury sedans. The valet in his crisp red uniform looked at the vehicle with open disdain, waving his hand as if to shoo away a stray dog. My heart hammered against my ribs. That was my mother. Eleanor Miller is 65 years old, though the sun and the wind of the plains have etched lines onto her face that make her look older. She is a woman of the earth. She does not know how to be fake. I watched her step out of the truck. She was wearing a navy blue silk dress. I recognized it immediately. It was the same dress she had worn to my college graduation and before that to her own sister's funeral. It was the only formal thing she owned. She smoothed the fabric down with hands that were calloused and shaped by decades of pulling weeds and mending fences. I abandoned the window and rushed down to the lobby, bypassing the groomsmen, who were busy toasting with scotch. I needed to get to her before anyone said something cruel. When I reached the lobby, the air was thick with the perfume of socialites. My mother stood near a marble pillar looking small. She was clutching her purse with both hands, her eyes darting around the gilded ceiling, the crystal chandeliers, and the towering floral arrangements. She looked terrified. "Mom!" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. She turned, and her face broke into a smile that warmed the cold marble room. "Robert! Oh, look at you! You look like a movie star." I hugged her, smelling the faint scent of lavender soap and old paper. It was the smell of home, a smell I had tried so hard to wash away. But now, surrounded by strangers in $5,000 gowns, It was the only thing that felt real. "I am so glad you made it," I said, pulling back to look at her. "The drive was okay?" "The old truck complained a bit on the highway," she laughed softly, patting my arm. "But we made it. I would not miss this for the world." She looked down at her shoes. They were sensible, low-heeled black pumps, polished until they shined, but clearly out of fashion. "I hope I look all right, Robbie. I did not want to embarrass you in front of your new friends." "You look beautiful, Mom," I said, and for the first time that day, I was telling the absolute truth. However, the warmth was short-lived. A wedding planner with a headset and a clipboard materialized beside us, her smile tight and practiced. "Mrs. Miller, if you would follow me, we can get you seated before the ceremony begins." I nodded. "I will walk her in. She is sitting in the front row on the groom's side." The planner hesitated, checking her clipboard. She frowned. "Actually, Mr. Miller, there has been a slight adjustment to the seating chart. Mrs. Miller is seated at table 42. I blinked. "Table 42? There are only 45 tables. That is in the back." "It is near the banquet entrance," the planner said unapologetically. It was a request from the bride's family, to ensure flow. "That is ridiculous," I snapped, feeling a flush of anger rise up my neck. "She is the mother of the groom. She sits at the front." "Robert, it is fine," my mother said quickly, touching my elbow. Her voice was trembling. "I do not mind sitting in the back. I can see just fine from anywhere." "It is not fine, Mom," I said. "Stay here." I marched toward the bridal suite. I needed to speak to Vanessa. This had to be a mistake, a clerical error. When I entered the suite, it was a flurry of activity. Makeup artists were hovering around Vanessa, who sat in front of a lighted mirror like a queen preparing for court. She looked breathtaking, I had to admit. Her hair was swept up in an intricate chignon, and her makeup was flawless. But she was not looking at herself in the mirror. She was looking at her phone, scrolling through hashtags of our wedding that had not even happened yet. "Vanessa," I said. She glanced up, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Robert, you cannot be in here. It is bad luck." "We need to talk about the seating," I said, ignoring the gasps of the bridesmaids. "Why is my mother at table 42? She is next to the kitchen doors, Vanessa. She should be up here with your parents." Vanessa sighed, a sound of long-suffering patience. She waved her hand, dismissing the makeup artists. They scurried away, like frightened mice. "Babe," she said, her voice dropping to that sweet, patronizing tone she used when I disagreed with her choice of curtains. "We talked about this. Your mother is simple. She is not used to this kind of attention. Putting her at the head table under the lights with the senator and the board members, it would just overwhelm her. I did it for her comfort." "She is my mother," I insisted. "She drove 4 hours in a truck with no air conditioning to be here. I want her next to me." "And she will be," Vanessa said, standing up and smoothing the silk of her robe. She walked over and placed a hand on my chest. "In spirit. Look, Robert, my parents have invited some very important investors today. People who can make or break your career. We cannot have awkwardness. You know how your mother gets. She tries to help. She talks about the farm. It is just not the right vibe for the VIP section. Please, do it for me. It is my day after all." I looked at her. I looked at the diamond earrings glittering in her ears, earrings that cost more than my mother's farm made in 5 years. I felt a knot of shame tighten in my stomach. Not shame for my mother, but shame for myself, because I let her win. I was so afraid of ruining the perfect day, so afraid of upsetting the sterling balance that I swallowed my pride. "Fine," I whispered. "But she comes up for the family photos immediately." "Of course," Vanessa beamed, pecking me on the cheek. "Now get out. You are ruining the surprise." I walked back out, feeling like a coward. I escorted my mother to table 42. It was exactly as bad as I had feared. It was tucked in a dark corner, right next to the swinging doors, where the waiters would be marching in with trays of food. The draft from the kitchen smelled of roasted lamb and dish soap. "This is perfect, Robbie," my mother lied, sitting down and placing her purse on her lap. She looked so small in that big, empty chair. The other seats at the table were empty. It was the overflow table, likely for vendors or distant cousins who might not show up. "I am sorry, Mom," I said, crouching down beside her. "Stop it," she scolded gently. "Go get married. Be happy." As I walked back toward the altar, my mind drifted back over the last 2 years. I tried to remember a time Vanessa had shown any genuine interest in where I came from. Every time I suggested we visit the farm, there was an excuse. "My allergies are terrible this season, Robert. All that pollen would kill me," she had said the first summer. "I cannot be around all that dust, it ruins my complexion before the gala," she had said the next. "It is just so far and the Wi-Fi is terrible, how will I work?" was the constant refrain. I had accepted these excuses because I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe that our worlds could coexist without colliding. But seeing my mother sitting alone in the shadows, while the Sterlings held court at the front of the room, the blindfold was beginning to slip. I took my place at the altar. The guests were filing in now. 560 strangers. I recognized maybe 10 people. The rest were business associates of Richard Sterling, politicians and socialites. This wasn't a wedding. It was a networking event. I looked for my mother again. She was holding something in her lap. It wasn't her purse. It was a package wrapped in brown newspaper and tied with frayed twine. She held it with both hands, hugging it to her chest as if it were precious gold. I knew what that wrapping paper was. My father used to save the Sunday comics to wrap Christmas presents because we couldn't afford fancy paper. A lump formed in my throat. Amidst the sea of Tiffany blue boxes and silver-plated gifts on the designated table, my mother had kept her gift close, likely afraid someone would throw it away if they saw the newspaper wrapping. The music changed. The heavy doors opened. The ceremony was beginning. But just before the bridal march began, I saw something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Arthur Pendleton, the Sterling family's personal attorney, was not sitting in the audience. He was standing by the entrance, huddled close to the wall. He was not smiling. He looked like a vulture waiting for a carcass. As the bridesmaids began their procession, Vanessa paused at the doorway before stepping out. Pendleton leaned in and whispered something urgently into her ear. It was a wedding. Why was her lawyer whispering to her 5 seconds before she walked down the aisle? Vanessa nodded a sharp, decisive motion that looked nothing like a nervous bride. She checked her watch. Who checks their watch right before walking down the aisle? Then the organ swelled, drowning out my thoughts. Vanessa stepped into the light. The crowd gasped. She was undeniably stunning. Her dress was a custom Vera Wang that cost more than the down payment on my first apartment. The train sprawled behind her like a cloud of white foam. She began to walk toward me. Every eye in the room was on her, but I was watching her eyes. They say a bride looks at her groom as if he is the only person in the world. I searched for that look. I desperately wanted to see love, reassurance, even nervousness. But Vanessa was not looking at me. Her eyes were scanning the room. She looked to the left at the senator. She looked to the right at the real estate tycoons. Her gaze swept over the crystal chandeliers, the high vaulted ceilings, and the heavy velvet drapes. It was a look of calculation. She was counting the house. She was assessing the value of the audience. It was the look of a predator, surveying its territory, ensuring that every trap was set and every asset was accounted for. She finally locked eyes with me when she was only 10 feet away. Her smile widened, camera ready, and dazzling. But behind the mascara and the contact lenses, the eyes were flat. There was no warmth. There was only the cold, hard glint of ambition. I reached out my hand to take hers, and her skin was ice cold. As she stepped up beside me, the scent of her expensive perfume washed over me, but beneath it I could swear I smelled something else. It was the metallic electric smell of a storm about to break. I did not know it then, But the woman standing next to me was not thinking about vows or eternity. She was thinking about signatures and lithium. And as the priest began to speak, I felt a sudden violent urge to run. But I stood still, paralyzed by the weight of 500 pairs of eyes, unaware that the ground beneath my feet was about to crumble. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of hollow recitation. I remember placing the platinum band on Vanessa's finger. It was a perfect fit, sliding on with the ease of a well-oiled machine part. But when my skin brushed against hers, I flinched internally. Her hand was not just cold. It was lifeless, like touching a mannequin in a store window. As the priest droned on about eternal love and sacrifice, I felt a subtle vibration against my palm. Vanessa was tapping her finger against her thigh, a rhythmic, impatient tapping. Every 30 seconds, her eyes flicked to the diamond-encrusted watch on her wrist. She was timing the vows. It felt less like a wedding and more like a scheduled transaction that was running over the allotted slot. When the officiant finally pronounced us husband and wife, the applause was polite, restrained, and expensive. We moved to the grand ballroom for the reception, a cavernous hall, dripping with gold leaf and velvet. The transition was seamless, orchestrated by an army of staff with earpieces. We stood on the raised dais, the focal point of the entire room, flanked by a towering champagne tower that shimmered under the chandeliers. This was the moment for the toasts, the part of the evening where rehearsed speeches were supposed to bring tears to the eyes of the guests. But the script was about to be rewritten. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement near the service doors. It was my mother. She had left table 42. The room was dim, with spotlights focused on us, but I could see her clearly. She was clutching that newspaper-wrapped bundle against her chest, navigating through the maze of tables. She looked terrified, yet there was a stubborn set to her jaw that I knew well. She was coming to the stage. She was coming to welcome her new daughter. I started to step forward to meet her, to guide her up the stairs, but Vanessa gripped my arm. Her nails dug into my bicep through the fabric of my tuxedo. "What is she doing?" Vanessa hissed, her smile, never leaving her face, her teeth clenched so tight I thought they might crack. "Get her back to her seat, Robert." "She just wants to give you her gift," I whispered back, pulling my arm away. "Let her have this moment." My mother reached the stairs. She hesitated, looking up at the two of us. She looked so small against the backdrop of the massive floral arrangements. She took a breath, steadied herself, and walked up the 3 steps onto the stage. The spotlight operator, thinking this was a planned part of the program, swung a beam of light onto her. Suddenly, Eleanor Miller, in her old navy dress and sensible shoes, was the center of attention for 560 of New York's elite. She walked toward Vanessa, her hands trembling slightly. She began to unwrap the newspaper covering. It crinkled loudly in the silence of the room. I saw guests in the front row exchanging confused glances. Why was the groom's mother holding yesterday's trash? "Vanessa," my mother said, her voice shaking but audible. She did not have a microphone, but the acoustics of the room carried her words. "I know I do not have much. I know I am not like your family. But I wanted you to have this." She pulled away the paper to reveal a delicate lace handkerchief. It was yellowed with age, but immaculately clean. "This was my great-grandmother's. She carried it at her wedding in 1895. It has been in our family for 4 generations. And this," she reached into the bundle and pulled out a glass jar. It was a quart jar of honey golden and thick with a piece of honeycomb floating in the center. "This is the first harvest from the hives Robert built when he was 12. I saved the best jar for a special day." I smiled. I remembered those hives. I remembered the stings and the sweetness. It was the most genuine thing in the entire room. But as she held the jar out, I noticed the problem. The lid was not sealed perfectly. The heat of the drive, or the nervous gripping of her hands, had caused a small leak. A thin, amber trail of sticky honey was running down the side of the glass and onto my mother's fingers. "I welcome you to the family, dear," my mother said, tears of happiness welling in her eyes. She stepped forward, opening her arms to embrace her new daughter-in-law. The world seemed to slow down. I saw the drop of honey glisten on my mother's thumb. I saw her reach out, intending to hug Vanessa, a gesture of pure, unfiltered love. And then I saw Vanessa's face. The mask did not just slip, it shattered. The camera-ready smile vanished, replaced by a contortion of absolute, unbridled revulsion. Her eyes went wide, not with surprise, but with horror. "No!" The scream ripped through the air, shrill and piercing. It was not a scream of fear. It was a scream of fury. Vanessa jerked backward, as if she had been burned. Her movement was violent and clumsy. Her elbow swung out, catching the edge of the champagne tower behind her. It happened in slow motion. The top glass tipped, then the second tier, then the third. Gravity took over. The entire pyramid of 300 crystal flutes collapsed. Crash. The sound was deafening. It sounded like a chandelier falling from the ceiling. Glass exploded in every direction. Champagne sprayed like a geyser, drenching the stage, soaking the hem of Vanessa's dress, and splashing onto my mother's shoes. Silence. Absolute suffocating silence descended on the room. 560 people froze. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. The band stopped playing. The only sound was the dripping of champagne onto the hardwood floor and the hum of the air conditioning. Vanessa stood there, her chest heaving. Her microphone clipped to her bodice, for the vows was still live. The sound engineer, paralyzed by shock, had not cut the feed. Vanessa looked at the wet spot on her dress, a tiny mixture of champagne and a single smear of honey, where my mother's finger had grazed her. She looked up at my mother, and her voice boomed through the speakers, amplified to a terrifying volume. "Get away from me!" she shrieked. "You smell like cow manure! You smell like a pile of garbage!" My mother froze. Her arms were still halfway raised, caught in the aborted hug. She looked at Vanessa, unable to comprehend the violence of the words. "Vanessa!" my mother stammered. "Do not speak to me!" Vanessa yelled, her face red veins bulging in her neck. She brushed frantically at her dress. "Look what you did! This is a custom Vera Wang. You touched it with your filthy, dirt-crusted hands. You ruined it." She turned to the crowd, her eyes wild. "Where is security? Why is this old hag on the stage? I told you to keep her in the corner." The speakers whined with feedback, a high-pitched screech that matched the hysteria in Vanessa's voice. "She is going to infect us all," Vanessa screamed, pointing a manicured finger at my mother. "Look at her. She carries diseases from those animals. Get her out of here before she makes my guests sick." I stood there, rooted to the spot. My brain was trying to process the data, but it refused to compute. This was the woman I had just married. This was the woman who claimed to love poetry and sunsets. My mother stood in the wreckage of the glass and the puddle of alcohol. She looked down at her hands, the hands that had planted corn, birthed calves, and bandaged my scraped knees. She looked at the honey on her thumb. She started to wipe it onto her own silk dress frantically, like a child who had spilled grape juice on a white carpet. She was trembling so hard her teeth were chattering. Tears were streaming down her face, cutting tracks through her powder. "I am sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the ringing in my ears. "I just wanted to give you the honey." From the front table, a laugh broke the silence. It was a cruel, sharp bark of laughter. I looked down. It was Vanessa's mother, Eleanor Sterling. She was covering her mouth with a napkin, but her eyes were dancing with amusement. "Oh, God," Mrs. Sterling said loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. "I told Richard we should not have invited the help. It is like trying to put a dress on a pig. They just do not know how to behave in civilized society." Her friends at the table giggled nervously, following her lead. That sound, that snickering, condescending laughter, was the sound of a key turning in a lock inside my mind. Something in my chest snapped. It was a physical sensation, like a cable parting under too much tension. The illusion of the last 2 years dissolved. The penthouse, the job, the status, the approval of these people. It all turned to ash in my mouth. I looked at Vanessa. She was still ranting, demanding a towel, demanding the manager, treating my mother like a stain on the floor. I looked at my mother. She was shrinking into herself, wishing the floor would open up and swallow her whole. She looked at me with eyes full of apology, as if she was the one who had failed me. Memories flooded me. I remembered those hands breaking ice in the horse troughs at 4 a.m. so the animals could drink. I remembered those hands sewing patches onto my jeans because we could not afford new ones. I remembered those hands holding mine in the hospital when I broke my arm. Those were the hands Vanessa Sterling had just called filthy. My patience, my desire to fit in, my fear of being an outsider, it all died in that instant. I walked past Vanessa. I did not look at her. I walked straight through the puddle of champagne crunching glass under my dress shoes. "Robert!" Vanessa snapped. "Do not just stand there. Help me. Call the police and have her removed." I ignored her. I reached my mother. I took her trembling hands in mine. I did not care about the honey. I did not care about the sticky mess. I squeezed them tight. "It is okay, Mom," I said softly. "It is okay." I took out my own handkerchief, silk, monogrammed, useless, and gently wiped the tears from her face. Then I wiped her hands. "Robert, I ruined your wedding," she sobbed. "No," I said, my voice steady and cold as a winter freeze. "You saved it." I turned around. I saw the microphone lying on the table where Vanessa had dropped it to wipe her dress. I picked it up. Vanessa stared at me. "Robert, what are you doing? Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them she is senile. We can fix this." I looked at her. Really looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes. Not fear of losing me, but fear of the scene. Fear of the Instagram story. Fear of the bad PR. I brought the microphone to my lips. My voice did not shake. It was the voice of a man who was finally completely awake. "The wedding is canceled," I said. The words echoed off the vaulted ceiling, booming with finality. A gasp rippled through the room. "You have 10 minutes to leave," I continued, my eyes sweeping over the 560 faces of the people who had laughed at my mother. "If this room is not empty in 10 minutes, I am cutting the power to the building. And I am locking the doors." I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. The feedback squealed one last time like a dying animal, and then there was silence again. But this time, it was the silence of an empire beginning to crumble. The silence that followed the dropping of the microphone did not last long. It was broken by a collective gasp that sucked the air out of the room, followed immediately by the chaotic roar of 560 people trying to speak at once. It sounded like a hive of angry hornets kicked over by a boot. I did not wait to see the fallout. I turned my back on the dais, on the champagne-soaked stage, and on the woman I had pledged my life to only an hour before. I took my mother's arm, guiding her down the steps with a gentleness that stood in stark contrast to the violence of the moment. Behind me, I heard Vanessa shriek my name. "Robert! Robert, you come back here right now!" I kept walking. Then came the performance. I heard a thud, followed by the clatter of heels. "Oh my God, she is fainting! Someone catch her!" a bridesmaid screamed. I paused for a fraction of a second, just long enough to glance over my shoulder. Vanessa had collapsed into the arms of her maid of honor, her head lolling back theatrically, one hand draped perfectly over her forehead, like a Victorian heroine in a tragedy. It was a flawless performance, executed with the precision of a woman who knew exactly where the cameras were positioned. But I saw her eyelids flutter. I saw her hand tighten on the maid of honor's dress to steady herself. It was fake, just like the vows, just like the smiles, just like us. I turned back to my mother. "Walk, Mom. Just keep walking." We navigated through the sea of tables. The guests parted for us not out of respect, but out of shock and perhaps a little fear. They looked at us as if we were walking contagions. I saw Arthur Pendleton, the lawyer, frantically typing on his phone near the exit, his eyes dark and calculating as they tracked my movement. We burst through the double doors and into the lobby. The air here was cooler, less suffocating than the ballroom, but it still smelled of money and pretense. I felt the tuxedo jacket constricting my shoulders. It felt heavy, like a suit of armor made of lead. I stopped in the center of the lobby, right in front of the grand fountain. "Robert?" my mother asked, her voice small and frightened. I ripped the silk bow tie from my neck and threw it into the fountain water. Then, I shrugged off the bespoke tuxedo jacket, the one that had cost $4,000, and let it drop to the marble floor. It landed in a heap, looking like a shed skin. I unbuttoned the cuffs of my shirt and rolled up the sleeves, revealing my forearms. I needed to feel the air on my skin. I needed to feel like myself again. "Let's go home," I said. We walked out to the valet stand. The attendant looked at me, disheveled sans jacket with a crying elderly woman in a stained dress, and then looked at the line of Ferraris and Bentleys. "The Ford," I said. "Bring it around, now." He scrambled to obey. When the battered red pickup truck rumbled to the curb, coughing blue smoke, it looked like a chariot of liberation. I helped my mother into the passenger seat, ignoring the stares of the valet, and climbed behind the wheel. The smell of the cab hit me, old vinyl, stale coffee, and dust. It was the best thing I had smelled all day. As I steered the truck onto the chaotic streets of Manhattan, leaving the towering spire of the Grand Plaza in the rearview mirror, my phone began to vibrate. It started as a single buzz in the center console, then another, and then it became a continuous angry hum. I ignored it for the first hour. I needed to focus on driving, on putting miles between us and the city that had almost swallowed me whole. My mother sat silently beside me, staring out the window at the passing concrete landscape as it slowly gave way to the suburbs and then the open highway. She was clutching her purse so tightly, her knuckles were white. "Robert," she finally whispered, breaking the silence as we crossed the state line. "You should go back." I gripped the steering wheel. "No." "You love her," she said, her voice cracking. "I saw how you looked at her. I ruined it. I am just a foolish old woman with a jar of honey. I embarrassed you. If you go back now, maybe you can fix it. Maybe she will forgive you." "Forgive me." I let out a harsh, dry laugh. "Mom, she called you garbage. She humiliated you in front of 500 people. There is nothing to fix. That bridge did not just burn. I blew it up." "But the money," she fretted. "The wedding, the guests. You worked so hard for that life." "It was not a life, Mom," I said, looking at her. "It was a performance, and I am tired of acting." The phone buzzed again, sliding across the dashboard. I glanced at the screen. It was lit up with notifications, text messages, missed calls, voicemails. The names flashing on the screen were a roll call of the life I was leaving behind. Vanessa Richard Sterling. Eleanor Sterling, the wedding planner, my boss at Vertex Horizons. I asked my mother to hand me the phone. "Read them," I said. "No, wait. I will put it on audio. I want to hear what love sounds like when the mask comes off." I tapped the screen and played the first voicemail. It was from Richard Sterling. His voice filled the cab of the truck, booming and distorted by rage. "Robert, you listen to me, and you listen good. You have exactly 1 hour to turn that piece of junk truck around and get back here to issue a public apology. You humiliated my daughter. You humiliated the Sterling name. If you do not fix this, I will make sure you never work in architecture again. I will bury you in lawsuits. You think you can walk away? You signed a contract, boy. I will take everything. I will take your savings, your reputation, and the shirt off your back." My mother gasped, covering her mouth. I didn't flinch. "Next." The next message was a text from Vanessa. I had the phone, read it aloud. "You are crazy. You have lost your mind. How dare you do this to me? Do you have any idea how many followers I just lost? You just destroyed the most important day of my life because your mother is a clumsy idiot. You come back here and beg on your knees, Robert. And you better have a check ready. You owe me $1 million for emotional distress and damages to the venue. $1 million, Robert. Do not ignore me. $1 million, I repeated softly. Not, I am sorry. Not, let's talk. Just a demand for cash. My mother was weeping now, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. They are going to destroy you, Robbie. They are powerful people. They are loud people, I corrected. There is a difference. The barrage continued for the next 3 hours. Threats of litigation, threats of physical violence from Vanessa's brother, accusations that I was mentally unstable. My boss left a message saying I was suspended indefinitely, pending an investigation into my professional conduct. Apparently dumping a client's daughter at the altar was bad for business. By the time the sun began to set, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange, we were turning off the interstate and onto the gravel road that led to Green Valley. The transformation was physical. The noise of the city, the aggression of the traffic, the digital assault. It all faded as the tires crunched onto the dirt. The air coming through the open windows changed. It smelled of damp earth, pine needles, and the sweet, heavy scent of corn waiting for harvest. We pulled up to the farmhouse. It was a modest 2-story wooden structure, the white paint peeling in places, the porch sagging slightly on the left side. It was nothing like the glass and steel condos of Manhattan. It was imperfect. It was old. And it was beautiful. I helped my mother down from the truck. She looked exhausted, her age showing in every movement. Go inside, Mom, I said. Make some tea. I need to check the perimeter. Perimeter? She asked, confused. Robbie, we are home. The cows do not care about weddings. I know, I said, trying to sound casual. Just habit. Go on. I watched her go inside and turn on the kitchen light. The warm yellow glow spilled out onto the porch, a beacon of safety. But I did not feel safe. The threats from Richard Sterling were ringing in my ears. Men like that did not just threaten, they acted. I walked the property line. The farm was large, spanning 300 acres of rolling hills and dense woodland. It was quiet, save for the chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. But as I reached the northern boundary near the old service road that ran parallel to the highway, I saw something. A car was parked in the shadows of the oak trees about 50 yards away. It was a black sedan, sleek and modern, completely out of place on a dirt utility road used for tractors. The engine was idling. I could see the faint puff of exhaust in the cool night air. The headlights were off. I froze, narrowing my eyes. Hey! I shouted, stepping over the fence. Can I help you? The reaction was immediate. The headlights flared to life, blindingly bright high beams that cut through the darkness like knives. The engine roared, a high-performance whine that spoke of serious horsepower. The car spun its tires, kicking up a cloud of dust and gravel, and tore off down the road, disappearing around the bend in seconds. My heart was racing. That was not a lost tourist. That was surveillance. I walked back to the house, my mind racing. Why would someone be watching the farm tonight? Did the Sterlings send someone this quickly? It seemed impossible. We had driven straight here. I entered the kitchen. My mother was sitting at the table, a cup of tea in her hands, staring into the steam. She looked fragile. Robbie, she said, I am going to bed. I just need to sleep. Good night, Mom, I said, kissing her forehead. Lock your door. She looked at me puzzled, but nodded and went upstairs. I sat down at the kitchen table. My phone was still buzzing occasionally, but the frequency had slowed. I poured myself a glass of tap water, water that came from our own well, cold and clean, and sat in the dark. Then a notification chimed. It was different from the others. It was not a text, and it was not a voicemail. It was an email. I unlocked the phone. The sender was unknown. The subject line was blank. I opened it. The email was short, sent from an encrypted service that scrambled the sender's origin. The text was stark white against the dark background of my phone screen. You think you just canceled a wedding. You did more than that. You saved your mother's life. Do not believe me? Check her medical records, not the ones she showed you. The real ones. I stared at the screen. The hair on my arms stood up. My mother was healthy. She was strong as an ox. She worked the farm every day. But then a memory surfaced cold and sharp. A month ago. Vanessa had been so insistent. Robert, your mother is getting older. She lives out there alone. We need to be responsible. I have booked her an appointment with Dr. Harrison. He is the best specialist in the city. He is a family friend. Please make her go, for my peace of mind. I had thought it was an act of kindness. I had bullied my mother into going. She had come back with a clean bill of health, just some blood pressure medication. Or so I thought. I stood up the chair, scraping loudly against the floor. I walked over to the antique sideboard where my mother kept her important papers. It was a chaotic mess of bills, receipts, and seed catalogs. I dug through the pile, my hands shaking slightly. I found the manila envelope from her trip to the city last month. It was stamped with the logo of Harrison Medical Group. I pulled out the papers inside. It was a standard summary. Blood pressure, elevated. Cholesterol, normal. Recommendation, diet and exercise. It looked fine. I looked at the email again. Not the ones she showed you. I sat back down, the paper crinkling in my fist. The car outside. The rush to get my mother to a specific doctor. The lawyer whispering to Vanessa before the wedding. The desperation to keep my mother in the back, away from anyone she might talk to. The pieces were floating in my mind, jagged and unconnected, but I could feel the edges starting to align. This was not just about a wedding. This was not just about class snobbery. I looked at the dark window, at the vast emptiness of the farm outside. Someone had been watching us, and someone, a stranger on the internet, knew something about my mother's health that even I did not. I typed a reply to the anonymous email, my fingers flying across the glass screen. Who are you? I hit send. I waited. 1 minute later, a reply appeared. A friend of the truth. Look at the diagnosis date. Then look at the date Vanessa asked you to sign the power of attorney papers for the wedding insurance. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. The power of attorney. Vanessa had brought it up casually over dinner 2 weeks ago. Just in case something happens to her during the wedding, Robert. So we can make medical decisions if she falls or has a stroke. It is standard. I hadn't signed it yet. I had forgotten. But if I had signed it, and if I had married Vanessa today, I looked at the sleeping house around me. It wasn't just a farm anymore. It was a target. And I had almost handed the keys to the enemy. I placed the phone on the table, the screen glowing in the dark. I wasn't an architect tonight. I was a man standing on the edge of a precipice, looking down into a darkness I was only just beginning to understand. The morning sun hit the dusty floorboards of the kitchen, but it brought no warmth to the chill settling in my bones. I had not slept. The anonymous email was burned into my retinas. Check her medical records. I sat on the floor, surrounded by the contents of the sideboard I had emptied in a frenzy. Old tax return, seed catalogs, and birthday cards lay scattered like debris. My mother was outside feeding the chickens, humming a tune, blissfully unaware that I was hunting for proof of her insanity. Or rather, proof of the lie about her insanity. I found it at the bottom of the stack, tucked inside a glossy brochure for a retirement community called Golden Horizons. It was a heavy, cream-colored envelope, sealed with a red, confidential stamp. This was not the summary sheet she had shown me. This was the full report. I ripped it open. My eyes scanned the dense medical jargon until they landed on the diagnosis section. Patient name, Eleanor Miller. Date of examination, June 15th. Attending physician, Dr. Marcus Harrison. Diagnosis, early onset Alzheimer's disease with rapid cognitive decline. Patient exhibits paranoia, memory loss, and inability to manage financial affairs. Recommendation, immediate appointment of a legal guardian. Institutional care recommended within 6 months. My hand shook so hard, the paper rattled. Alzheimer's. My mother could remember the price of corn in 1998. She could recite the lineage of every cow in the herd. She did not have Alzheimer's. I looked at the signature at the bottom. Dr. Marcus Harrison. I knew that name. I had seen him at the Sterling's Christmas party swirling a glass of scotch and laughing at Richard Sterling's jokes. He wasn't just a doctor. He was a payroll physician for the elite. "Robert!" I jumped. My mother was standing at the screen door, holding a basket of eggs. "You look like you have seen a ghost. Is everything okay?" I scrambled to hide the paper behind my back. "Fine. Everything is fine. Mom, get changed. We are going to the city." "The city?" she frowned. "We just left the city. I am not going back there, Robbie." "Not New York," I said, standing up and trying to keep my voice steady. "We are going to the state capital. I want you to see a doctor. Just for a checkup." "I just saw Dr. Harrison last month," she protested, wiping her hands on her apron. "He said I was fine, just old." "He lied," I said, the anger slipping into my voice. "Please, Mom, humor me." 2 hours later, we were sitting in the sterile, fluorescent-lit office of the chief of neurology at the State University Hospital. I had called in a favor from an old college roommate to get an emergency appointment. Dr. Evans, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, spent 90 minutes with my mother. She ran cognitive tests, memory drills, and even a quick scan. When she came back into the waiting room, she looked confused. "Mr. Miller," she said, looking at her clipboard, "why exactly are you here?" "I was told she has early-onset dementia," I said, crossing my arms. "That she needs a guardian," Dr. Evans laughed. It was a dry, incredulous sound. "Dementia? Mr. Miller, your mother scored 29 out of 30 on the cognitive assessment. The only point she missed was because she didn't know the current #1 song on the pop charts. Her brain scan is clearer than mine. She has mild hypertension, likely from stress, but her mind? It is sharp as a tack. Who told you she was senile?" "A friend of the family," I muttered. "A very bad friend." The relief was physical, like a weight being lifted off my chest, but it was immediately replaced by a cold, hard rage. They were going to gaslight her. They were going to lock her away in a facility, medicate her into a stupor, and take the keys to everything she owned. On the drive back, I handed the wheel over to my anger. I pulled over at a rest stop and dialed a number I hadn't used in 3 years. "David," I said when the line clicked open. "Robert Miller," the voice on the other end drawled. "I saw the news. Or rather, I saw the TikToks. You are trending, buddy, and not in a good way." "I need you to work," I said, cutting him off. "I need everything you can find on a Dr. Marcus Harrison, and I need a deep dive into the Sterling family finances. Not the public reports, the real books." "That is expensive work," David said, "and from what I hear, you just threw away your golden ticket." "I have savings," I said. "I will wire you $5,000 right now. Just find me the link. Find me why they needed my mother declared incompetent." "Done," David said, his tone shifting to professional. "Give me 24 hours. I hung up and made the mistake of opening social media. It was a bloodbath. Vanessa had been busy. She had posted a video filtered to make her look pale and fragile, tears streaming down her face. The caption read, "He abandoned me because I wasn't country enough. He let his mother attack me. I am heartbroken and terrified." The video was edited perfectly. It cut out her screaming insults. It cut out the cow manure comment. It only showed me grabbing the microphone and kicking everyone out. The comments were thousands of death threats. What a monster. I hope he rots. Someone should burn down his farm. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat. Let them talk. I had a war to fight. When we got back to the farmhouse, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon. The shadows stretched long across the fields. My mother went to the kitchen to start dinner, still confused about the day's urgency. I went back to the pile of papers on the floor. The medical report was the gun, But I needed the bullet. Why? Why go to such lengths? I picked up my mother's old leather handbag, the one she had carried to the wedding. I dumped it out. Minced tissues, a rosary, and a folded blue document holder. "Mom," I called out. "What is this blue folder?" "Oh, that?" she shouted back from the kitchen. "That is the insurance thing Vanessa gave me. She said it was for old age. You know, in case I slip on the ice or something. She was so sweet about it. She said she wanted to make sure I was taken care of if I could not make decisions for myself." My stomach dropped. I unfolded the document. It wasn't insurance. It was a durable power of attorney for property management. I read the clauses. It was standard legal boilerplate until I hit Section 14, Paragraph B. In the event that the principal, Eleanor Miller, is declared mentally incompetent by a licensed physician, all rights to manage, sell, lease, or encumber the real property located at 104 Green Valley Road shall transfer immediately to the designated guardian. And there, typed in crisp black letters, was the name of the designated guardian, Vanessa Sterling Miller. The date on the signature was 3 weeks ago. It was a setup, the perfect trap. Step 1. Get the old woman to sign a power of attorney under the guise of care. Step 2. Get a crooked doctor to declare her incompetent immediately after the wedding. Step 3. Vanessa, now my wife and the legal guardian, ships my mother off to a home and sells the farm. I would have been powerless to stop it. As her husband, I would have likely deferred to her, or worse, she would have used the medical report to overrule me. I stared at the paper. This wasn't just greed. This was predatory. Suddenly, a knock on the back door made me jump. It wasn't a visitor's knock. It was a frantic, rhythmic tapping. I moved to the door, grabbing a heavy iron skillet from the stove on my way. I flipped on the porch light and yanked the door open. A man was standing there. He was young, maybe 25, wearing a reflective orange vest and muddy work boots. He looked terrified. He kept glancing over his shoulder at the dark tree line. "Mr. Miller," he whispered. "Who are you?" I asked, gripping the skillet. "My name is Mike," he said, his voice shaking. "I need to talk to you. I saw what happened at the wedding on the news. I can't sleep. What do you want?" "I was here 3 months ago," Mike said. "I work for a survey company, Geotech Solutions." "We didn't hire a surveyor," I said. "I know," Mike said. "The Sterlings did, but they paid us cash to do it at night, to keep it off the official county records." I lowered the skillet. "Come in." Mike stepped into the kitchen, looking at the floor. He pulled a rolled-up map from his jacket. He spread it out on the kitchen table, pushing aside the medical records and the power of attorney. It was a topographical map of our farm, but it was covered in red heat map markings. "They told us they were looking for water table viability for a housing development," Mike said, pointing to the red zones. "That is what they told the county. But that is not what we found." He tapped a large dark red blotch that covered the entire north pasture, the land my mother had refused to sell for decades. "See this?" Mike said. "This isn't just water. This is a brine deposit, a massive one." "Brine?" I asked. "Like salt water?" "Lithium," Mike corrected, looking me in the eye. "High-grade lithium. The kind they use for electric vehicle batteries. The kind that is worth billions right now." I stared at the map. The red blotch looked like blood spreading across the paper. "They did core samples," Mike continued, speaking faster now. "The concentration is off the charts. It is one of the largest untapped deposits in the state. If they build a smart city here, that is just a cover. They are going to strip mine this place. They don't want the land for houses, Mr. Miller. They want to turn your mother's farm into an open-pit mine." I looked at the map. Then, I looked at the fake medical diagnosis. Then at the power of attorney. It all made sense. The desperation, the rush to marry, the $500,000 wedding, the lawyer. They weren't marrying me. They were acquiring an asset. My mother wasn't a person to them. She was an obstacle sitting on top of a fortune. and I was just the signature they needed to move her out of the way. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked Mike. "Because they fired me yesterday," Mike said, his fists clenching. "And because my grandmother has dementia. Real dementia. What they tried to do to your mom is evil." I looked at the documents scattered on the table. The puzzle was complete. I had the motive, I had the weapon, and I had the map of the crime scene. "Mike," I said, a cold calm settling over me, "are you willing to go on record with this?" "If it takes them down," Mike asked. "Yes." "Good," I said. "Because I am not just going to sue them. I am going to bury them." My phone buzzed again. It was another email. But this time it wasn't anonymous. It was from Vertex Horizons, my company. Subject: termination notice. I didn't even open it. I didn't care. I was done building fake gardens for rich people. I had a real landscape to defend. I picked up the map of the lithium deposit. It was time to show the Sterlings that they had dug in the wrong soil. They thought they were dealing with a simple farmer and his son. They were about to find out that when you dig too deep, sometimes you hit something explosive. The surveyor. Mike had left an hour ago, leaving behind a map that looked less like a topographical survey and more like a treasure map drawn in blood. I sat alone at the kitchen table, the silence of the farmhouse pressing in on me. My phone buzzed again. It was not a threat from the Sterlings this time. It was the email from David, the private investigator. The subject line was simple: the House of Cards. I opened the attachment. It was a dense, 50-page financial dossier. As I scrolled through the PDF, the numbers jumped out at me, red and angry. To the outside world, the Sterling family was American royalty. They were philanthropists, real estate moguls, the kings of Manhattan. But the spreadsheet told a different story. They were broke, not just cash poor. They were drowning. The Sterling Group was leveraged to the hilt. They owed over $50 million to a consortium of overseas banks, and the loans were callable within 30 days. Their luxury condos in Miami, mortgaged twice over. The private jet, leased. The wedding, probably paid for on a credit card that was about to be declined. I read David's summary note at the bottom of page 5. "Robert, they are bleeding out. They bet big on commercial office space right before the market crashed. They need a miracle liquidity event to avoid bankruptcy and federal indictments for fraud. The Sterling Smart City project isn't just a new development. It is their lifeboat." I switched tabs to the second document David had sent. It was a leaked internal memo from a company called Omega Corp, a massive international mining conglomerate based in Zurich. The memo outlined a purchase agreement. Omega Corp had agreed to pay $180 million for the mineral extraction rights of a specific parcel of land in upstate New York. The coordinates matched my mother's farm exactly. But here was the kicker. Here was the knife in my back. There was a transaction record attached. A wire transfer for $5 million. The date was 4 days ago. The recipient was a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands called VSM Holdings. VSM, Vanessa Sterling Miller. She had already taken the deposit. I felt the bile rise in my throat. I had to run to the kitchen sink, gripping the porcelain rim until my knuckles turned white. It wasn't just a betrayal of love. It was a felony in progress. Vanessa had sold land she did not own, using a name she did not yet legally have. Based on a power of attorney, she had tricked an old woman into signing. I went back to the table and mapped out her plan on a napkin. It was terrifyingly simple. Step 1. Marry me to secure the Miller name and legal proximity to the property. Step 2. Use the fake medical diagnosis from Dr. Harrison to declare my mother mentally incompetent. Step 3. Activate the power of attorney granting Vanessa full control over my mother's assets. Step 4. Admit my mother to a budget state-run nursing home, drugging her into silence. Step 5. Finalize the sale to Omega Corp for $180 million, claiming the land was being sold to pay for my mother's medical care. Step 6. Dump me, or perhaps keep me around as a clueless trophy husband, living off the proceeds of my own mother's destruction. I shivered. The woman I had held in my arms, the woman I had planned to have children with, was a monster. She looked at my mother and didn't see a human being. She saw a lithium deposit wrapped in a cheap dress. My thumb hovered over the Twitter icon on my phone. The urge to post everything right now was overwhelming. I wanted to upload the map, the financial records, the fake diagnosis. I wanted to burn their reputation to the ground before the sun came up. But I stopped. If I posted this now, they would spin it. They would say the documents were forged. They would say I was a bitter ex-groom trying to frame them. They had high-priced crisis management teams. I had a laptop and a spotty Wi-Fi connection. I needed to be smarter. I needed to trap them in a way they could not wriggle out of. I needed them to confess. I looked at the contact information on the Omega Corp memo. The regional director was a man named Elias Thorne. I took a deep breath. It was 3 a.m, but international business never sleeps. I found the number for Omega's New York field office. I dialed. A tired assistant answered. Omega Corp emergency line. This is urgent, I said, pitching my voice lower, trying to sound like the high-powered attorneys I used to hear in the hallways of the Grand Plaza. This is Robert Miller, legal counsel for Eleanor Miller. I need to speak to Mr. Thorne immediately regarding the acquisition of the Green Valley site. Tell him he is purchasing stolen goods. There was a pause. 1 moment, sir. 2 minutes later, a gruff voice came on the line. This is Thorne. Who is this? Mr. Thorne, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. You wired $5 million to a VSM Holdings 4 days ago as a down payment for the mineral rights to my client's land. Is that correct? That information is confidential, Thorne snapped. And the deal is closed. We are dealing with the authorized guardian, Mrs. Sterling Miller. Mrs. Sterling Miller is not the guardian, I said, my voice cold and hard. The power of attorney she provided you is fraudulent. The medical diagnosis supporting it is fake. And my client, the actual owner of the land, is currently sitting in her kitchen drinking tea, fully cogent, and completely unaware she is selling her home. Silence on the other end. If you proceed with this transaction, I continued, pressing my advantage, you will be party to wire fraud, elder abuse, and grand larceny. When the FBI raids the Sterling offices, do you want Omega Corp's name on the warrant, or do you want to help me catch them? Thorne was a businessman. He didn't care about my mother, but he cared about his money. What do you have? I have the real medical records, I lied. Well, half lied. And I have the surveyor who mapped the site illegally. I am willing to give you a clean path to the rights eventually if you help me expose the fraud now. But if you back Vanessa Sterling, I will tie this land up in litigation for 50 years. You will never see an ounce of lithium, Thorne grunted. I am listening. What do you need? I need you to play dumb, I said. Keep pressure on them to close the deal. Make them desperate. Make them think the money is ready to be released the second I sign the papers. You are playing a dangerous game, Mr. Miller, Thorne said. They started it, I replied. I am just finishing it. I hung up. My hands were shaking. I had just bluffed a multinational corporation. Now came the hard part. I walked upstairs. My mother was awake. She was sitting in her rocking chair by the window, looking out at the dark fields. She was still wearing the dress from the wedding, though she had taken off the shoes. Mom, I said softly. She turned. Her eyes were red and swollen. I can't sleep, Robbie. I keep hearing her voice. Cow manure. Is that what people think of us? No, I said, kneeling beside her chair. That is what she thinks. Mom, I have to tell you something. And it is going to hurt. I told her everything. I told her about the debt. I told her about the lithium. I told her about the plan to put her in a home. I watched her face crumble. It wasn't anger. It was pure, unadulterated heartbreak. She couldn't understand how people could be so cruel. She wanted to lock me away, she whispered, her voice trembling. Just for dirt? Just for rocks? For $180 million worth of rocks, I said. Mom, we are sitting on a gold mine. And they tried to kill you for it. She sat there for a long time staring at her hands. The hands Vanessa had mocked. Then a change came over her. She sat up straighter. The sadness in her eyes hardened into something steelier. It was the look she used to get when a fox was in the henhouse. "Help me up," she said. I helped her stand. She walked over to the closet and pulled out a shoebox. Inside was a key, heavy, and made of old iron. "Your grandfather," she said, clutching the key. "He always told me the land was special. I thought he meant spiritual. He used to spend hours in the north pasture with his geology books." "Where is the safe, Mom?" I asked. "In the cellar," she said, "behind the preserves." We went down into the cool, damp cellar. Behind a row of dusty jars of pickled beets, there was a small section of loose brick. I pried it away to reveal a rusty wall safe. My mother handed me the key. I turned it. The mechanism groaned, but it opened. Inside there was no money. Just a stack of yellowed documents wrapped in oilcloth. I pulled them out and carried them up to the kitchen light. They were the original land deeds dating back to 1920. But underneath them was a document I had never seen. It was a geological survey from 1980, commissioned by my grandfather. Summary of findings. Significant lithium brine deposits detected. Estimated value projected to increase with technological advancement. Recommendation: hold rights in perpetuity. Do not sever mineral rights from surface rights. He knew, I whispered. He knew 40 years ago. And there was one more paper. A notarized affidavit signed by my grandfather shortly before he died. I, Samuel Miller, hereby decree that the Green Valley Farm and all subsurface assets shall remain the sole property of the Miller bloodline. Any transfer of title requires the unanimous consent of all living heirs and a waiting period of 1 year. Any sale enacted under duress or through a power of attorney is immediately void. I stared at the paper. It was a dead man's switch. My grandfather had built a legal fortress around this farm from the grave. If Vanessa had succeeded in selling the land using the power of attorney, this document would have surfaced during the title search and voided the sale instantly. But she would have already destroyed my mother by then. "We have them," I said, a smile finally touching my lips. "Mom, we have them." "What are we going to do?" she asked, looking at the affidavit. "We are going to give them exactly what they want," I said. "I am going to call Vanessa. I am going to tell her I am sorry. I am going to tell her I made a mistake and that I want to sign the papers to let her take care of you." My mother looked horrified. "Robert, no." "It is a trap, Mom," I said. "We need them to admit it. We need to get them in a room with witnesses and get them to admit they faked your medical records. We need them to put the contract in front of me." I picked up the phone. It was almost dawn. "I am going to invite them here," I said. "Or no better. I will go to them. I will walk into the lion's den. And when I walk out, I will be wearing a fur coat." I looked at the date on the affidavit. It was ironclad. "Get some sleep, Mom," I said. "Tomorrow I have to go apologize to my wife." I sat back down at the table and watched the sun come up over the north pasture. The light hit the dew on the grass, making it sparkle like diamonds. Or lithium. I composed a text to Vanessa. My fingers hovered over the keys. I had to sound broken. I had to sound defeated. "Vanessa, I am at the farm. I have been thinking all night. You were right. Mom is not well. I saw her talking to herself tonight. I am scared. I don't know what to do. The medical bills are going to be huge. Maybe we can talk. I think I need your help." I hit send. Then I waited. It took 30 seconds. "Oh, Robert, thank God you came to your senses. I was so worried about you. I forgive you, baby. We are a team. Come to the office today at noon. My father wants to help. We can fix everything." I stared at the word team. "See you at noon," I whispered to the empty room. "Bring your checkbook." I drove back into the city, with the ghost of my grandfather riding shotgun. The traffic in Manhattan was the usual snarl of yellow cabs and delivery trucks, but everything looked different today. The skyscrapers didn't look like monuments to achievement anymore. They looked like tombstones. I pulled up a block away from the Sterling Group headquarters, a glass monolith that pierced the sky on 57th Street. Before I stepped out of the truck, I checked my equipment. David, the private investigator, had met me at a diner on the outskirts of the city an hour ago. He had taped a wire to my chest, a tiny black disc, no bigger than a button hidden beneath my undershirt. "It has a 4-hour battery life," David had warned, handing me a small earpiece that I wasn't going to wear. "And it uploads to the cloud in real time. Just get them talking. Don't be a hero, Robert. Be a victim. They love victims." I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I hadn't shaved. My eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep. I looked like a man who had lost everything. It was perfect. I walked into the lobby. The security guard, who usually waved me through, looked at me with a mix of pity and suspicion. He made a call before buzzing me up to the 42nd floor. The elevator doors opened onto the reception area of Sterling Real Estate. It was all white marble and minimalist art. Vanessa was waiting for me. She wasn't wearing the Vera Wang dress anymore, obviously. She was in a sharp, slate-gray power suit, her hair pulled back into a severe ponytail. She looked like a shark in Yves Saint Laurent. "Robert," she said. Her voice was soft, but her eyes were scanning me for weakness. "Vanessa," I croaked, letting my shoulders slump. "I am so sorry. I don't know what came over me." She walked over and placed a hand on my arm. It felt like a branding iron. "You were stressed, baby. We all were. The wedding, the pressure was too much. I forgive you." She led me into the conference room. It was a vast space with a view of Central Park. Sitting at the long mahogany table were the other players in this farce. Richard Sterling, looking red-faced and impatient. Eleanor Sterling, who was aggressively stirring a cup of tea. And Arthur Pendleton, the lawyer who was arranging a stack of documents with surgical precision. "Well, look who decided to crawl back," Richard grunted, not bothering to stand up. "Daddy be nice," Vanessa chided, guiding me to a chair. "Robert is here to fix things. Aren't you, sweetie?" "I just want to do what is right," I said, staring at the table. "My mom was acting so strange last night, talking to people who weren't there. I think you were right, Vanessa. She needs help." "Of course she does," Vanessa said, sitting next to me and sliding a glass of water toward me. "We only want what is best for her, Robert. That is why we need to handle the legal side of things today, before she hurts herself." Pendleton cleared his throat and slid a thick document across the polished wood. "This is a revised guardianship agreement, Robert. Since the marriage license wasn't signed yesterday, we need to formalize your consent to appoint Vanessa as the legal guardian for your mother's estate. It grants her power of attorney to liquidate assets to pay for Mrs. Miller's extensive care needs." I looked at the document. It was the death warrant for my farm. "I don't understand," I said, playing the role of the simple, overwhelmed son. "Why do we need to sell the farm? It is just dirt and corn. It can't be worth that much. Maybe a few $100,000? Is that enough for a nursing home?" Richard snorted. He leaned forward, his expensive cufflinks clinking against the table. "A few $100,000? Kid, you are thinking small. We have a buyer lined up who is willing to pay a premium. Not for the corn. For the potential." "Potential?" I asked, blinking innocently. "What potential?" "It is in the middle of nowhere." "It is a strategic location," Richard said quickly, glancing at Pendleton. "For ecotourism and sustainable housing. We can turn that dump into gold. I mean, we can turn it into a secure financial future for your mother." "So you are doing this just for her?" I asked, looking at Vanessa. "You are going to sell the land and put all the money into her care?" "Every penny," Vanessa lied, her face the picture of sincerity. Well, minus a small management fee for the firm, of course. But she will have the best room at Golden Horizons. Private nurses. View of the garden. She will be happy, Robert. I took a sip of water, buying time. I needed them to say it. I needed the confession. But what about the doctor? I asked, looking worried. Dr. Harrison, are you sure about his diagnosis? Mom seemed so lucid this morning. What if we get a second opinion? The air in the room froze. Vanessa's hand tightened on my arm. Robert, she said, her voice dropping an octave. Dr. Harrison is the best in the state. If you go to some random doctor, they might miss the signs. Do you want to take that risk? Do you want your mother to wander off into a blizzard because you didn't trust the expert? But he made the diagnosis so fast, I pressed. And you got the papers ready before the wedding. It feels rushed. It was efficient, Richard barked. That is how we do business, Robert. We anticipate problems. Vanessa knew your mother was cracking up weeks ago. She handled it. You should be thanking her, not questioning her. I looked at Vanessa. You knew weeks ago? Vanessa sighed, looking at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. Babe, I did it for you. I called Marcus, Dr. Harrison, and told him exactly what we needed. I mean, what we were observing. He agreed to expedite the paperwork so we wouldn't have to worry about it during the honeymoon. He did exactly what I asked him to do. He is a team player. Gotcha. He did exactly what you asked him to do, I repeated slowly. So the diagnosis was a favor? It was a professional courtesy, Pendleton interjected smoothly, sensing the danger. Based on Vanessa's detailed observation of the patient's behavior. Right, I said. A courtesy. I looked down at the contract. And this buyer, Omega Corp? I saw a name on one of the papers in your bag yesterday. Richard went pale. You went through my bag? No, it fell out when you were yelling at me, I lied. Omega Corp. They are a mining company, right? Why would a mining company want an ecotourism site? They are diversifying, Richard shouted, slamming his hand on the table. Damn it, Robert just signed the papers. Do you want your mother to die alone in that farmhouse? Or do you want to be a part of this family and be rich? Rich? I asked. I thought the money was for Mom. It is, Vanessa said quickly. But there will be plenty left over. Millions, Robert, we can travel. We can buy that penthouse in Soho you liked. Just sign the paper. Let me take the burden off your shoulders. She pushed a gold Mont Blanc pen into my hand. I looked at the pen. I looked at the contract. I looked at their greedy, desperate faces. Okay, I whispered. I trust you, Vanessa. I uncapped the pen. I bent over the document. I signed my name. Robert Miller. But I didn't sign it with my usual signature. I added a small, almost imperceptible loop at the end of the R. It was a mark I used on drafts and sketches at work to indicate concept only, not for construction. Legally, it was arguably still a signature, but combined with the fact that the document itself was a draft. I noticed the draft watermark faintly on the last page. It was meaningless. But to them, it looked like victory. There, I said, pushing the paper away. Vanessa snatched it up like a starving dog grabbing a bone. She checked the signature, then let out a breath she had been holding for 20 minutes. Oh, thank God, she said, leaning over to kiss me. I turned my cheek so her lips landed on my ear. You did the right thing, baby. I need to go to the bathroom, I said, standing up abruptly. My stomach. Go ahead, Richard said, waving his hand dismissively. He was already pouring himself a scotch from the sidebar. We will get this notarized and filed. You go home, pack a bag. Move into the apartment tonight. I walked out of the conference room. I didn't go to the bathroom. I walked straight to the reception desk. The receptionist was away. Lying on the counter right next to Richard's briefcase was a thick binder labeled Project Green Valley, Confidential. I glanced at the security camera. It was angled toward the elevators. I was in a blind spot. I flipped the binder open. I pulled out my phone and started snapping photos. Page 1. Omega Corp Purchase Agreement. Page 12. Lithium Extraction Timeline. Page 45. Relocation Plan for E. Miller. State Facility 4. Budget Allocation, Minimum. Page 50. Bribe Schedule, Local Zoning Board. My hands were flying. I photographed 20 pages in 30 seconds. I heard footsteps coming down the hall. I closed the binder and slid it back exactly where it was. I slipped my phone into my pocket just as Pendleton rounded the corner. "Robert?" he asked, his eyes narrowing behind his spectacles. "Everything all right?" "Just looking for a glass of water," I said, forcing a weak smile. "I think I'm going to head out. I need to tell Mom the good news." "We will send a car for her tomorrow morning," Pendleton said. "Make sure she is ready." "She will be ready," I said. "Count on it." I walked to the elevator. As the doors closed, I heard laughter erupting from the conference room. They were clinking glasses. They were celebrating. They thought they had won. The moment the elevator doors opened on the ground floor, I practically ran to the exit. I hailed a cab and gave the driver an address in Brooklyn. "David's office," I told myself. In the back of the cab, I pulled the wire off my chest. I stopped the recording. I uploaded the file to 3 different cloud servers. Then, I sent a text to David. "I have it. The confession, the bribery, the fake diagnosis, and photos of the mining deal." David replied instantly. "Get here now. Sarah is with me." Sarah Jenkins. She was an investigative journalist for the New York Chronicle. She had won a Pulitzer last year for exposing corruption in the city's sanitation department. She was tough, she was brilliant, and she hated the Sterlings. When I arrived at David's dusty office above a pawn shop, Sarah was already there, pacing the floor with a cigarette, unlit, in her hand. She was 32, with messy brown hair and eyes that looked like they could burn a hole through steel. "Let me hear it," she said, skipping the pleasantries. I plugged my phone into David's computer speakers. I hit play. The room filled with the sound of Vanessa's voice. "Dr. Harrison has done exactly what I asked him to do. He is a team player." Then, Richard's voice. "We can turn that dump into gold. We have a buyer lined up who is willing to pay a premium." Sarah listened, her expression unreadable. When the recording ended, she looked at the photos of the binder I had taken. "This is it," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "This is the smoking gun, the bullet in the body. Wire fraud, conspiracy, elder abuse, medical malpractice. And the bribery schedule? That brings down half the city council." "When do we publish?" I asked. Sarah looked at me. "I can have the story online in 2 hours, but..." "But what?" "But the Sterlings are hosting a charity gala on Saturday night," she said. "The Green Future Gala. They are planning to announce the Sterling Smart City project to the world. All the investors will be there. The mayor will be there. Omega Corp will be there." I understood immediately. "If we publish now, they go into damage control," I said. "They deny they spin, they settle out of court." "Exactly," Sarah said. "But if we wait, if we drop this bomb while they are standing on stage live on television..." "It is a public execution," David finished. I thought about my mother. I thought about the cow manure comment. I thought about the way Vanessa had looked at me when she told me to sign the papers, like I was a useful idiot. "Saturday," I said. "We wait for Saturday." "Are you sure?" Sarah asked. "It is 3 days away. They are going to try to take your mother tomorrow." "Let them try," I said. "I have a few surprises left at the farm. But I need you to do something for me, Sarah." "Name it." "I need you to find out who else Dr. Harrison has diagnosed for the Sterlings. If they did this to my mother, she wasn't the first." Sarah nodded. "I am on it. And Robert?" "Yeah?" "Nice acting," she said. "You almost fooled me with that sad puppy routine." I looked out the window at the city skyline. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the empire of lies the Sterlings had built. I wasn't acting, I said quietly. The man who loved Vanessa died in that conference room. The man who walked out is someone else entirely. The coffee in David's office had turned into a sludge that tasted like battery acid and regret, but none of us cared. We were running on pure adrenaline. It was 3 a.m, the dead hour when the city sleeps and secrets come out to play. Sarah Jenkins was hunched over a folding table, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard, like a pianist playing a concerto of destruction. Spread out before us were the geological surveys Mike had provided cross-referenced with the internal Sterling documents I had photographed. "Robert," Sarah said, stopping mid-sentence and looking up. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the glow of the screen. "Do you have any idea what you are actually sitting on?" "Mike said lithium," I replied, leaning against the filing cabinet. "He said it was a big deposit." "Big is an understatement," Sarah corrected, turning the laptop so I could see the spreadsheet she had compiled. I had a friend at the U.S. Geological Survey run the data from Mike's heat map. The brine concentration under your north pasture is not just high, it is freakish. We are talking about one of the purest lithium deposits on the East Coast. Conservative estimates? That land isn't worth $500,000. She paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the room. "It is worth $180 million, she said. I felt the air leave my lungs. 180 million? And that is just the mineral value, David chimed in from his desk, where he was cross-referencing public infrastructure plans. But here is the real kicker. Here is why the Sterlings are so desperate they were willing to frame your mother. Look at this." He pointed to a blue line running across a map of the county. "This is the proposed route for the new federal interstate connector," David explained. "The project was greenlit quietly 2 months ago. The Sterling Smart City project is landlocked. It has no access to the main highway. The only way to build an interchange, the only way to get cars in and out of their billion-dollar tech hub, is through your property." I stared at the map. My mother's farm was the bottleneck. It was the cork in the bottle. "Without your land," Sarah said, leaning back in her chair and lighting a cigarette she did not smoke. "Their smart city is a ghost town. They can't build the exit ramp. The zoning falls apart. The investors walk. The whole thing implodes." "So they needed the land for the lithium and the road," I said, the magnitude of the betrayal settling over me like a shroud. "And they offered me a nursing home bed." "They tried to steal a kingdom for the price of a cup of coffee," Sarah said, her voice dripping with disgust. "I have the article drafted. The Sterling heist. It lays it all out. The fraud, the fake doctor, the bribery, the lithium, the highway. I can hit publish right now." I looked at the screen. The publish button was a bright blue rectangle. 1 click, and the war was over. "No," I said. Sarah looked at me surprised. "No? Robert, they are coming for your mother. We need to nuke them." "If we publish now," I said, pacing the small room, "they will claim it is fake news. They will say I am a disgruntled ex-husband trying to extort them. They will sue the paper. They will drag it out in court for years while they bulldoze my farm. We need something undeniable. We need a spectacle." "The gala," David said, nodding slowly. "Saturday night." "Exactly," I said. "They are announcing the project to the world. They will have the press there, the investors, the governor. I want to look Richard Sterling in the eye when his world ends. I want to see Vanessa realize she bet on the wrong horse." "It is risky," Sarah warned. "You are giving them 2 more days. They will move on the farm. They have that signed document." I smiled, a cold, humorless expression. "Let them come. I have prepared a reception committee." I drove back to Green Valley as the sun was coming up. I did not sleep. I spent the morning making phone calls, draining the last of my savings account, and maxing out 3 credit cards. I wasn't buying fertilizer or feed. I was buying muscle. By 10 o'clock in the morning, the farm was quiet. My mother was inside knitting. She was calm now, oddly peaceful, since I had told her the truth. She knew the enemy. She knew the stakes. At 10:30, the dust cloud appeared on the horizon. It wasn't a single car this time. It was a convoy. A black Mercedes SUV led the way, followed by a white van with the logo Golden Horizons Assisted Living painted on the side. I stood on the front porch, drinking a cup of coffee. I checked my watch. Right on time. The convoy pulled up to the main gate. The Mercedes door opened, and Vanessa stepped out. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a silk scarf, looking like a movie star descending upon the peasants. She marched up the driveway, followed by two burly orderlies in white scrubs, who looked more like bouncers than medical professionals. She stopped at the foot of the porch steps, looking up at me. She smiled, but it was a shark's smile. "Good morning, darling," she called out. "I see you are packed. Where is Mother? The team is here to help her get settled." "She is inside," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "But she is not going anywhere," Vanessa sighed, pulling a folded document from her designer bag. "Robert, don't make this difficult. We signed the papers yesterday. I am her legal guardian. I have the authority to determine her residence for her own safety. Now step aside, or I will have the sheriff remove you for obstruction." She waved the paper in the air. The paper I had signed with my concept-only loop. "You have a piece of paper," I said. "I have a castle doctrine." I whistled a sharp, piercing sound. From behind the barn, from inside the garage, and from the edge of the cornfield, 6 men stepped out. They were not farmhands. They were wearing tactical vests and black uniforms. They were private security contractors, former military, the kind of men who charged $500 an hour and didn't ask questions. They formed a wall between the porch and Vanessa. They didn't draw weapons, but they stood with their arms crossed, radiating a silent, heavy threat. Vanessa took a step back, her confidence faltering for a split second. "What is this? Who are these people?" "Private security," I said calmly. "To protect the property from trespassers. And right now, Vanessa, you are trespassing." "I am the owner!" she shrieked, her voice losing its polished edge. "I have the power of attorney. This is my land." "Take it to a judge," I said. "But until a sheriff shows up with a court order, nobody sets foot in this house. And knowing the backlog at the county clerk's office, that will take about 3 days." The orderlies behind her looked nervous. They were paid to lift elderly patients, not fight mercenaries. They took a step back toward the van. Vanessa's face turned a shade of crimson I had never seen before. She marched up to the biggest security guard, a man named Tank, who was 6 feet 4 inches tall. "Move," she ordered. Tank looked down at her through his polarized sunglasses and didn't twitch a muscle. Vanessa spun around to face me. "You are pathetic. You think this changes anything? We have the contract. We have the deal. You are just delaying the inevitable. You are going to burn through your savings paying these goons, and in the end, I will still own everything." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe you should go home and get ready for your party. I hear the gala is going to be the event of the season. You wouldn't want to look tired for the cameras, would you?" She narrowed her eyes. "Are you coming?" "I wouldn't miss it," I said. "I have a donation to make." Vanessa laughed a harsh, brittle sound. "You? Donating? What are you going to donate, Robert? A sack of potatoes? Come if you want. It will be good for you to see what real power looks like. Maybe you can pick up some scraps from the buffet." She turned to leave her heels crunching on the gravel. "Let's go," she snapped at the orderlies. "We will come back on Monday with the police." As she reached the car door, the screen door behind me opened. My mother stepped out. She wasn't hiding anymore. She stood tall, her gray hair pulled back in a bun, wearing her work apron. She looked at Vanessa, the woman she had tried to hug, the woman who had called her garbage. "Vanessa!" my mother called out. Vanessa paused, hand on the car door, looking back with a sneer. "What? Do you want to beg?" "No," my mother said, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the yard without a tremor. I just wanted to tell you something. I used to feel sorry for myself because we didn't have money. But looking at you now, I just feel sorry for you." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Save the Hallmark card wisdom for the nursing home, Eleanor. You have lost the most important thing a person can have," my mother continued, ignoring the insult. "And it isn't money. It is your soul. You have traded your character for a check, and the check is going to bounce." Vanessa slammed the car door shut. The engine roared to life and the convoy sped away, kicking up dust that coated the private property sign I had nailed to the fence post. I watched them go. My heart was pounding not with fear, but with anticipation. My phone chimed. It was a text from David. "We just got the credit report. You were right. It is worse than we thought." I tapped the screen to open the details. The Sterling family had gone all in the last 48 hours, confident that I had signed the papers, and the lithium deal was a lock. Richard Sterling had leveraged every remaining asset he had. He had taken out a bridge loan against the Sterling Tower. He had mortgaged the family estate in the Hamptons. He had even borrowed against his own life insurance policy to pay the bribes and the contractors for the smart city groundbreaking. They had put every chip they had on the table. They were betting on a sure thing. They believed that on Monday morning, the Omega Corp money would hit their accounts and cover all these debts. If the deal fell through, if the truth came out, they wouldn't just be embarrassed. They would be destitute. They would lose the tower, the houses, the cars, the status. They would be left with nothing but the expensive clothes on their backs. I showed the message to my mother. "They bet the farm," I said. "But they bet the wrong farm." My mother looked at the phone, then at me. "Is it wrong to feel happy about this, Robbie?" "It isn't happiness, Mom," I said, putting my arm around her shoulders as the security team stood watch over our land. "It is justice, and it is being served cold." I looked toward the city, hidden behind the hills. "Get your best dress ready, Mom," I said. "We are going to a party." The trap was set. The bait was taken. The jaws were about to snap shut. And the best part was, they had walked right into it, blinded by their own greed. The countdown to Saturday night had begun. The charity gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel, a venue that smelled of old money and fresh desperation. The theme was Green Horizons, a laughable title considering the people in this room were planning to tear up the earth for profit. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive cologne. 500 guests, the cream of New York society, sat at round tables draped in silver linen. These were the people Richard Sterling had leveraged his entire life to impress. They were the investors, the politicians, and the bankers who held the debt that was currently strangling the Sterling empire. I stood at the back of the room, hidden in the shadows of the velvet curtains. I was not wearing the torn shirt and jeans I had fled the wedding in. I was wearing a bespoke tuxedo, tailored to perfection, one I had bought yesterday, with the last limit on my credit card. Beside me stood Sarah Jenkins, looking fierce in a sharp black evening gown that concealed the recording device in her clutch. Flanking us were two uniformed officers, and State Sheriff Patterson, a man with a jaw like granite, and a warrant in his jacket pocket. And next to me, holding my arm, was my mother. She wore a simple, elegant gray dress. She did not look like a victim. She looked like a matriarch. She was trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of what we were about to do. "Ready, Mom?" I whispered. "Let's finish it, Robbie," she replied softly. On the stage, Vanessa was in her element. She stood behind a lucite podium, bathed in a spotlight that made her diamond necklace sparkle like a constellation. She looked angelic. She was selling the lie of her life. "When I first visited the rural countryside," Vanessa crooned into the microphone, her voice dripping with practiced empathy. "I saw poverty. I saw struggle. But I also saw potential. That is why the Sterling Foundation is launching the Smart City Initiative. We are not just building houses. We are building hope. We are taking neglected barren land and turning it into a beacon of sustainability for the future." The audience applauded politely. Richard Sterling, sitting at the head table, beamed like a proud father raising his glass. He looked smug. He thought the deal with Omega Corp was done. He thought the nursing home van had picked up my mother this morning. He thought he had won. And, Vanessa continued, her voice catching with fake emotion, I want to dedicate this project to my mother-in-law, Eleanor. She is a simple woman battling significant health issues, but her sacrifice will pave the way for progress. We are ensuring she gets the best care possible, while her land serves a greater good. That was the cue. That is a lovely speech, Vanessa, I said, my voice projecting clearly from the back of the room. The heads of 500 guests snapped around. The applause died instantly. Vanessa froze. She squinted against the spotlight, trying to see into the darkness. Who is that? I stepped out of the shadows and into the center aisle. The spotlight operator, reacting on instinct, swung the beam onto me. Robert! Vanessa breathed, her voice amplified by the microphone. I walked down the aisle. I did not walk fast. I walked with the steady, measured pace of a man who owns the ground beneath his feet. My mother walked beside me, head held high. Sarah and the sheriff followed close behind a phalanx of justice, cutting through the sea of dinner jackets. You said you wanted a donation, I said, my voice carrying without a microphone, trained by years of shouting over construction equipment. I brought one. Security! Richard Sterling stood up, knocking over his wineglass. A dark red stain spread across the white tablecloth, looking disturbingly like blood. Get him out of here! He is trespassing! 2 security guards started to move toward me, but Sheriff Patterson stepped forward, placing a hand on his holster. The guards stopped dead in their tracks. You do not argue with the state sheriff. I reached the stage. Vanessa looked at me, her eyes wide with panic. She looked at my mother, then back at me. Robert, she hissed, covering the microphone with her hand. What are you doing? You signed the papers. Do not embarrass me again. I reached out and gently took the microphone from her hand. She was too shocked to resist. I am not here to embarrass you, Vanessa, I said into the mic, my voice booming through the hall. I am here to liberate you. You have been working so hard to hide the truth. It must be exhausting. I turned to the audience. I saw the confused faces of the investors. I saw Elias Thorne, the Omega Corp executive, narrowing his eyes at table 1. My wife, I said, gesturing to Vanessa, told you that my mother is sick. She told you she has dementia. She told you that we are selling our family farm to build an eco-friendly city. I paused. The silence was absolute. But I think you deserve to hear the real business plan, I said. Sarah, if you please. Sarah, standing by the audiovisual booth, gave a nod to a young man in a hoodie, my hacker friend, who had quietly taken control of the control board 5 minutes ago. The massive projection screen behind the stage, which had been displaying a rendering of a futuristic city, flickered. Then the video started. It was not a sleek promotional video. It was a shaky handheld video taken from a phone. It showed a binder labeled confidential. A hand, my hand, flipped the pages. The text on the screen was legible enough for the front row to read. Omega Corp Purchase Agreement. Lithium Extraction Rights. Relocation Plan. State Facility 4. The audience murmured. Then came the audio. It was crystal clear. It was the recording from the conference room 2 days ago. Vanessa's voice rang out sharp and arrogant. Dr. Harrison has done exactly what I asked him to do. He is a team player. Richard's voice followed, booming and cruel. We can turn that dump into gold. We have a buyer lined up who is willing to pay a premium. Not for the corn, for the potential. Then Vanessa again. I did it for you. I called Marcus and told him exactly what we needed. He agreed to expedite the paperwork. The murmurs in the crowd turned into a roar. People were standing up. Elias Thorne was on his feet, his face purple with rage. He was looking at Richard Sterling with murder in his eyes. I raised my hand. Wait, there is more. The screen changed. It showed the bribery schedule I had photographed. It showed the names of city council members and the amounts next to them. It showed the emails between Vanessa and Dr. Harrison discussing the fake diagnosis. I looked at Richard Sterling. He was gripping the table, his face draining of color. He looked like a man watching his own funeral. "You called my mother a dirty farmer," I said, turning back to Vanessa. "You mocked her poverty. You tried to lock her away in a state institution so you could strip mine her home." I took a step closer to her. She shrank back, hitting the podium. "But you made a mistake," I said. "You didn't check the land value properly. You were so busy trying to steal it for $5 million that you didn't realize what it was actually worth." I turned to the crowd. "My mother's farm sits on one of the largest lithium deposits on the eastern seaboard, and it is the only access point for the new federal interstate." I looked at Elias Thorne directly. "Mr. Thorne, your internal memo valued the mineral rights at $180 million. Is that correct?" Thorne didn't speak. He just nodded slowly, his eyes locked on Richard Sterling. A gasp went through the room. $180 million. "My mother," I said, gesturing to the woman in the gray dress standing at the foot of the stairs, "owns assets worth more than this entire room combined. She is not a charity case. She is a tycoon." I paused for effect. "And she has asked me to convey a message to the Sterling Group and to Omega Corp," I said. "The message is simple. No." "No?" Vanessa whispered, her voice trembling. "No," I repeated. "The farm is not for sale. Not for $5 million. Not for $180 million. It is our home. And it is not going to be a hole in the ground for your batteries." Richard Sterling let out a roar. It was a primal sound of pure desperation. "You lying bastard," he screamed. He grabbed a steak knife from the table and lunged toward the stage. He was not a fighter. He was a desperate old man who had just lost everything. He scrambled up the stairs, eyes wild, aiming for me. "I will kill you!" he shrieked. "You ruined me!" I didn't move. I didn't have to. Sheriff Patterson was there in a blur of motion. Before Richard could get within 5 feet of me, the sheriff tackled him. They hit the stage floor with a heavy thud that shook the podium. "Richard Sterling, you are under arrest!" Patterson shouted, wrenching Richard's arms behind his back. "You have the right to remain silent!" The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the room. Flashbulbs erupted. The press, who had been invited to cover a fluff piece about a charity, were now witnessing the crime story of the decade. They swarmed the stage. Vanessa stood there frozen. Her makeup was beginning to run as tears streamed down her face. She looked at her father being dragged away, cursing and spitting. Then she looked at her mother, who had fainted at the table. Then she looked at me. The arrogance was gone. The cruelty was gone. All that was left was fear. She realized that without the land, without the deal, the Sterling family was bankrupt. The debts would come due on Monday. They would lose the penthouse. They would lose the Hamptons estate. They would lose the very clothes on their backs. She ran to me. She grabbed my lapels, her hands shaking. "Robert," she sobbed, her voice high and desperate. "Robert, please. You have to stop this. He forced me. My father made me do it. I was scared of him. I didn't want to hurt your mom." I looked down at her hands on my tuxedo. I felt nothing. No love, no hate. Just a cold, distant pity. "He forced you to call my mother garbage?" I asked quietly. "He forced you to fake a dementia diagnosis? He forced you to try to lock her away?" "I was confused," she pleaded, pressing herself against me. "I love you, Robert. Remember, we are husband and wife. We can fix this. We can sell the land together. We can be the power couple of New York. Just tell them you forgive me." She was still doing it. Even now, with her world burning down, she was trying to close the deal. She was trying to sell me on a future that didn't exist. I reached up and peeled her fingers off my jacket one by one. I held her hands for a second, feeling the coldness of her skin, the same coldness I had felt at the altar. "You don't love me, Vanessa," I said, my voice flat. "You never did." I dropped her hands. You love the lithium under my mother's feet, I said. You love the idea of me. But the man standing here? You don't even know him. I stepped back. Sheriff, I called out. Sheriff Patterson handed Richard over to a deputy and walked over to Vanessa. He pulled a second pair of handcuffs from his belt. Vanessa Sterling Miller, the sheriff, said, his voice grim. I have a warrant for your arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and forgery, Vanessa screamed. No, you can't. I am a Sterling. Not anymore, I said. Now you are just an inmate number pending. The sheriff spun her around. She struggled, kicking and screaming, her beautiful dress tearing as she fought. But the steel cuffs clicked shut, binding her wrists behind her back. I turned away from her. I walked down the stairs to where my mother was standing. The room was in chaos. Investors were shouting into phones trying to kill the deal. Lawyers were running for the exits. The waiter was trying to clean the wine stain off the tablecloth. My mother looked up at me. She had tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. Did we win? She asked. Yeah, Mom, I said, taking her arm. We won. I looked back one last time. Vanessa was being led away, weeping her mascara, creating black streaks down her face that looked like prison bars. She locked eyes with me, pleading silently for mercy. I turned my back on her. Let's go home, I said to Sarah and my mother. I think I have had enough of the city. We walked out of the ballroom, leaving the ruins of the Sterling Empire behind us. The flashbulbs popped, but I didn't blink. I walked out into the cool night air of New York, and for the first time in years, I felt clean. The stain of the Sterling ambition was finally washed away, not by champagne, but by the truth. The fall of the House of Sterling was not a graceful descent. It was a controlled demolition broadcast live on every major news network. The footage of Richard Sterling being tackled on stage, his tuxedo bunched up around his shoulders as he screamed obscenities, played on a loop on CNN for 3 days straight. But the real dismantling happened in the quiet, sterile rooms of courthouses and boardrooms, where the ink on the warrants dried faster than the tears of the accused. The arrests were swift and total. Dr. Harrison was picked up at his private practice the next morning. He tried to shred the files, but the police were faster. They found emails, bank transfers, and a draft of a second false diagnosis for another elderly, wealthy widow. He was not just a bad doctor. He was a serial predator in a white coat. He sang like a canary in exchange for a plea deal confirming every detail of Vanessa's request to incapacitate my mother legally. Eleanor Sterling. Vanessa's mother was arrested at their Hamptons estate while trying to hide a bag of diamonds in the pool filter. She was charged with conspiracy and money laundering. Her haughty demeanor evaporated the moment the handcuffs touched her wrists. She wept, blaming her husband, blaming Vanessa, blaming everyone but herself. The financial fallout was cataclysmic. When the markets opened on Monday morning, Sterling Group stock did not just dip, it flatlined. The revelation that their smart city was built on fraud and bribery caused a panic. By noon, trading was halted. By Tuesday, the company filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. There was no reorganization, no bailout. It was a liquidation sale of an empire. I watched it all from the safety of the farm, drinking coffee on the porch with my mother. We saw the news helicopters circling the Sterling Tower as federal agents carried out boxes of evidence. It felt like watching a disaster movie, except we were the ones who had written the script. The lawsuits came like a tidal wave. The investors who had been duped, the banks who had loaned millions on bad collateral, and the contractors who had been stiffed. Everyone wanted a piece of the carcass. The court ordered the immediate seizure of all personal assets to pay off the creditors. The penthouse on Fifth Avenue? Seized. The fleet of luxury cars? Auctioned. The art collection, the jewelry, the designer clothes? All of it was tagged, cataloged, and sold to the highest bidder. I saw a photo online of Vanessa's custom Vera Wang wedding dress, the one she had screamed about protecting from my mother's dirty hands, being sold on eBay for a fraction of its cost. The description read, slightly stained with champagne. Bad karma included. The trial was the media event of the year. I testified. My mother testified. Sarah's article, The Sterling Heist, was entered as Exhibit A. Vanessa tried to play the victim one last time. She arrived at court wearing modest clothes, no makeup, looking like a repentant schoolgirl. She wept on the stand. She claimed she was coerced by her domineering father. She claimed she truly loved me and only wanted to help my mother. But the jury didn't buy it. Not after they heard the recording. Not after they heard her voice cold and calculating, talking about shipping my mother off to a budget facility. Not after they saw the text messages where she referred to me as the useful idiot. The verdict took 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Richard Sterling was sentenced to 20 years for massive fraud, bribery, and racketeering. He had a heart attack in the holding cell 2 days later. Mild, but enough to ensure he would spend the rest of his life in the prison infirmary, weak and broken. Vanessa stood to receive her sentence. The judge, a stern woman who had clearly taken a dislike to Vanessa's theatrics, looked over her glasses. "Vanessa Sterling," the judge said, "you preyed on the vulnerable. You used the sacred institution of marriage as a tool for theft. You plotted to strip an elderly woman of her dignity and her home. This court finds your actions not just illegal, but morally repugnant." 8 years. 8 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, and elder abuse. As the bailiffs led her away, she looked back at the gallery. She didn't look for her parents. She looked for me. I was sitting in the back row next to Sarah. I met her gaze. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just watched. She was a stranger to me now, a ghost of a mistake I had survived. Prison, I heard later, was not kind to Vanessa. The story of her cow manure tantrum had gone viral. It became a meme. People remixed her screaming voice with techno music. In prison, reputation is everything, and Vanessa arrived with a reputation as the spoiled brat who hated farmers. The other inmates, many of whom came from working-class backgrounds, did not take kindly to her. She was mocked relentlessly. Every time she complained about the food or the scratchy sheets, someone would yell, "Watch out, it smells like cow manure." She spent her days scrubbing floors, a bitter irony for a woman who had once claimed she was allergic to dirt. Back in Green Valley, life was returning to a new kind of normal. My mother, Eleanor Miller, became a local legend. Strangers would stop her in the grocery store to shake her hand. They called her the Iron Lady of the farm. She hated the attention, but she loved the fact that the land was safe. The title deed was locked in a new safe one that required both our signatures to open. I became a minor celebrity myself, but I wanted no part of the circus. Talk shows called. Magazines offered six-figure sums for an exclusive interview, titled The Groom Who Got Away. I turned them all down. I only gave one interview. It was to Sarah Jenkins for the New York Chronicle. We sat on the back porch of the farmhouse, watching the sunset over the lithium-rich fields. "Why didn't you sell?" Sarah asked, her pen hovering over her notebook. "You could have taken the $180 million. You could have been set for life." "I am set for life," I said, looking at my mother tending her garden. "I have my home. I have my self-respect. And I have the truth. If I sold the land to Omega Corp, even for a fair price, I would just be finishing what the Sterling started. I would be destroying the one thing my mother loves. Money is just paper, Sarah. Land is history. It is memory." Sarah wrote that down. She looked at me, and for the first time she wasn't looking at a source or a victim. She was looking at a man. "You know," she said, closing her notebook, "most guys would have taken the check and bought a Ferrari. I am a truck guy," I smiled. I quit my job at Vertex Horizons the day after the trial. I couldn't go back to designing rooftop gardens for the same kind of people who had tried to destroy us. I took the remaining money in my savings, and a small loan from a local bank that was more than happy to do business with the Miller family, and started my own firm. Miller Associates, Sustainable Land Preservation. I didn't design penthouses. I worked with farmers. I helped them navigate complex zoning laws, fight off predatory developers, and set up conservation easements. I used my knowledge of the enemy's playbook to help other families protect their land. I became the architect for the underdog. Sarah and I kept in touch. At first, it was professional. She would call me for quotes on land disputes. I would call her for advice on media inquiries. Then the calls became personal. We talked about books, about music, about how much we both hated gala dinners. 6 months after the trial, she drove up to the farm to follow up on the story. She didn't bring a notebook. She brought a bottle of wine and a homemade pie. We sat on the porch swing. My mother was inside pointedly, giving us privacy. "So," Sarah said, watching the fireflies dance over the cornfield, "how does it feel to be the guy who took down the Sterlings?" "It feels quiet," I said. "And quiet is good." She looked at me, her eyes reflecting the porch light. "You are a good man, Robert Miller. There aren't many of those left in my line of work." "You are a pretty good detective yourself," I replied. She laughed, and it was a warm, genuine sound that chased away the last, lingering echoes of Vanessa's screeching. We didn't kiss that night. We just sat there, two survivors of a war enjoying the peace. But I knew, and she knew, that something new was growing here. Something real. Something that had roots deep enough to weather any storm. The Sterling family was gone. Their name was mud. Their fortune was dust. They were a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties, a joke told in boardrooms. They had tried to buy the world, but they had forgotten the price of admission was integrity. And as for us, we were just getting started. The farm was safe. The lithium stayed in the ground, a sleeping giant that we chose not to wake. We were rich, not in dollars, but in the currency that actually mattered. Loyalty, justice, and the sweet, clean smell of earth after a rain. Time, as they say, is the ultimate judge. It sifts through the noise, the pretense, and the lies, leaving only what is real. It has been 2 years since the gavel fell, and the handcuffs clicked shut on the wrists of the Sterling family. 2 years is enough time for a lot of things to change. It is enough time for a scandal to fade from the headlines, replaced by the next big outrage. It is enough time for a prison sentence to begin breaking a person's spirit. But most importantly, it is enough time for the earth to heal. I stood on the porch of the farmhouse, looking out over the green valley. It lived up to its name more than ever now. The corn was waist-high and vibrant green, swaying in the gentle breeze. But there were changes. To the north, where the Sterlings had planned to dig their open-pit mine, stood the entrance to the newly dedicated Eleanor Miller Nature Reserve. It was a protected sanctuary for local wildlife, a place where families came on weekends to hike and breathe clean air. We had donated the surface rights of that specific sector to the state trust, ensuring that no bulldozer would ever tear up the topsoil again. However, we were not foolish. We knew what lay beneath our feet. 6 months after the trial, I sat down with a consortium of government scientists and ethical mining engineers. We found a way. We signed a contract for low-impact brine extraction. It was a closed-loop system, almost invisible from the surface, that pumped the lithium-rich water up, extracted the mineral, and returned the water to the aquifer. It was slow, it was sustainable, and it was incredibly lucrative. We did not get the lump sum of $180 million all at once. Instead, we received royalties. Every month a check arrived that was larger than what my father had made in his entire life. We used it to install a state-of-the-art irrigation system that saved water. We fixed the roof. We bought a new truck, though I kept the old Ford for sentimental reasons. And we secured the future of every farmer in the county by offering them low-interest loans to modernize their own operations. We became the bank that the Sterlings never were, a bank with a heart. But today, the lithium and the money were the furthest things from my mind. I adjusted my tie. It was not a silk bow tie from a designer boutique. It was a simple knit tie that matched my navy suit. I felt comfortable. I felt like myself. "You ready, Robert?" I turned to see David standing in the doorway. He was my best man. The private investigator who had helped me dig up the truth was now digging into a plate of appetizers before the ceremony started. "I have been ready for 2 years," I said, smiling. Today was the wedding, my wedding. But this was not the Grand Plaza. There were no chandeliers dripping with crystal. There were no assigned seats based on net worth. There was no velvet rope. We were getting married right here in the South Pasture, under the shade of the great oak tree that my great-grandfather had planted. The altar was a simple wooden arch, built by my own hands, draped with ivy and sunflowers grown in my mother's garden. The guest list was not 560 people. It was 80. There was Mike, the surveyor, who had risked his job to bring me the map. He was sitting in the front row with his grandmother, who was having a lucid day and enjoying the sunshine. There was the sheriff out of uniform laughing with the local baker. There were the neighbors who had lent us tractors when ours broke down. These were people who knew the price of a gallon of milk and the value of a handshake. And then there was my mother. She walked out onto the porch and my breath caught in my throat. She was not wearing a designer gown that cost thousands of dollars. She was wearing a dress of soft cornflower blue linen, tailored by a local seamstress. It matched her eyes. She wore no diamonds, but she glowed with a radiance that no jewelry could replicate. In her hands she held a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked herself this morning. Daisies, black-eyed Susans, and purple clover. She looked like a queen. Not a queen of a crumbling empire, but a queen of the earth. "You look handsome, Robbie," she said, her eyes crinkling with joy. "Sarah is going to faint." "I hope not," I laughed. "I don't think David knows CPR." The music started. It was not a string quartet playing Wagner. It was a local bluegrass band playing a sweet acoustic melody on a fiddle and a guitar. I walked my mother down the aisle of grass. The guests stood up not out of obligation, but out of genuine love. I saw smiles. I saw tears. I smelled the scent of barbecue smoking in the pit for the reception, mingling with the smell of fresh-cut hay. It was the best perfume in the world. Then Sarah appeared. She walked out of the farmhouse door alone. She was wearing a simple white sundress, vintage lace with a crown of flowers in her hair. She was barefoot. As she walked across the grass, she looked wild and free and utterly beautiful. She didn't look like she was inspecting a merger. She looked like she was coming home. When she reached me, her hands were warm. Her eyes were clear. There was no calculation in them. There was no glancing at a watch. There was only us. The vows were short. We didn't need flowery language. We promised to be partners. We promised to tell the truth. We promised to protect each other. "I do," I said. "I do," she said. And when I kissed her, the applause that erupted was raucous and unrefined. People cheered, whistled, and stomped their feet. It was the sound of pure, unfiltered joy. The reception was a picnic. We sat on long wooden tables covered in checkered cloths. We ate ribs and corn on the cob and potato salad. We drank iced tea and local beer. As the sun began to dip lower, casting a golden hour glow over the party, I stepped away from the crowd for a moment to take it all in. I leaned against the fence line watching my wife, my real wife, laughing as she tried to teach David how to line dance. Then I saw movement on the road. The main road ran past the edge of our property about 200 yards away. A car had pulled over onto the shoulder. It was a beat-up sedan older than my truck. A woman was standing by the car looking through the fence rails. I squinted. The posture was familiar. The tilt of the head. It was Vanessa. I had heard through the grapevine that she had been released early on parole due to overcrowding and exemplary behavior, which I assumed meant she had learned to manipulate the prison guards just as well as she had manipulated her father. But the sterling fortune was gone. Her parents were destitute. She was on her own. She was wearing a waitress uniform, a brown polo shirt and black slacks. Her hair, once coiffed to perfection, was pulled back in a messy bun. She looked tired. She looked older. She was watching the wedding. She was watching the laughter, the food, the joy. She was watching the life she had thrown away because she thought it wasn't expensive enough. Our eyes met across the distance. 2 years ago, I would have felt rage. I would have wanted to march over there and shout at her, to wave my success in her face. I would have wanted to tell her that I won. But as I stood there surrounded by people who loved me, with a bank account full of clean money and a heart full of peace, I felt nothing of the sort. I felt pity. She looked small. She looked like a ghost haunting a house she had tried to burn down. She had chased the gold and lost the rainbow. She held my gaze for a moment longer. I saw regret in her eyes, deep, hollow regret. She wasn't looking at the money we had made. She was looking at the happiness we had built. She realized finally that this was what she was actually starving for. She looked down at the ground, then turned and got back into her rusty car. The engine sputtered and she drove away slowly, disappearing down the road, leaving nothing behind but a cloud of dust. I took a deep breath. I let it out. I let her go. "Robert," I turned. Sarah was standing there holding 2 plates of pie. "Who was that?" "Nobody," I said, taking a plate. "Just someone looking for directions. They were lost." "Well, we are found," Sarah said, leaning her head on my shoulder. We walked back to the head table. My mother was waiting for us. She had a mischievous glint in her eye. She reached under the table and pulled out a familiar object. It was a glass jar. It was not the same jar from the wedding. That one had been lost in the chaos. But it was from the same hive harvested this very morning. It was golden, thick, and perfect. "Sarah," my mother said, her voice thick with emotion. "I wanted to give this to my daughter-in-law 2 years ago. I finally found the right one." The guests quieted down. They knew the story. They knew the significance of the honey. Sarah didn't scream. She didn't recoil. She didn't ask if it was pasteurized or if it would stain her dress. She took the jar with both hands, treating it like it was the Hope Diamond. She twisted the lid open. The sweet floral scent wafted up. She dipped her finger into the jar, heedless of the sticky residue, and put it to her lips. She closed her eyes. "It tastes like sunlight," Sarah said, smiling at my mother. "It is the best thing I have ever tasted." My mother beamed. She stood up and hugged Sarah, burying her face in Sarah's shoulder. Sarah hugged her back, fierce and protective. I watched them. The 2 women I loved most in the world. One who had given me life and one who had given me back my life. I walked over and wrapped my arms around both of them. We stood there in a huddle, swaying slightly to the music. I realized then that the Sterlings were right about one thing. There was a fortune here, but they had been looking for it with Geiger counters and geological surveys. They had missed the real treasure. The value wasn't in the lithium. It wasn't in the bank account. The value was in the callus on my mother's hand. It was in the dirt under my fingernails. It was in the way Sarah looked at me when I woke up in the morning. "Value," I whispered to myself, looking at the setting sun, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. "It is not about the price tag. It is about the cost." Vanessa had known the price of everything and the value of nothing. We knew the cost of loyalty, and we had paid it, and now we were reaping the dividends. We sat down on the steps of the porch as the sun finally dipped below the horizon. The fireflies came out in force, thousands of tiny lights blinking in the cornfield, mirroring the stars above. We ate pie. We laughed. We were surrounded by the hum of the earth. I looked at my mother, safe and respected. I looked at my wife, loving and real. I looked at my land, whole and protected. I was Robert Miller. I was a farmer. And I was the richest man in the world. Thank you so much for listening to this story of justice and redemption. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Please comment your city or country below so we can see how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed seeing the good guys win and the arrogant fall, please hit that like button, subscribe to the Calm Revenge Stories channel, and don't forget to press the hype button to help this video reach more people who need a little satisfaction in their day.